After having won the previous build battle, Altec 2K challenged me for a rematch. And what better game to do the second ever build battle than Path of Exile 2? But this time I was not only challenged by Altec 2K, but Luna Tally will also join the battle, or the build battle challenge. So this is gonna be a three-way battle. The winner again can be voted in the post by you, the community. You can choose whichever build is the fanciest, the best, whatever you're choosing for, whatever reason is valid. Feel free to vote in the poll in the description, and also check out the video or the builds from Lunatelli and Altec2K, also linked in the description. This build battle is of course not without challenge. We are again looking at off meta. So we are restricting ourselves to a 3 divine budget. We weren't allowed to use Hand of Wisdom in action, Archmage. We weren't allowed to use the powerful skills like Spark. We weren't allowed to use Magnetic Salvo, Lightning Arrow, Lightning Rod, and Tempest Flurry and Ice Strike. We also, or I myself at least, further restrict myself not using any of the other known broken skills like Poisonous Concoction, Detonate That, Hex Blast, just trying to find something niche. Now, I already had something niche in mind, and that was bone skills, but more to that in a bit. So, I went for a Blood Mage, or well, a Blood Witch, and further enhanced it with bone skills. Now, this is really reminiscing of me of these Diablo 2, Diablo 3 builds, where you had bone cages, tether, and just a Bonemancer feeling. And this really reminds me of that, and it works for that. So what we're using is we're using 3 bone skills: Bonestorm, Bone Blast, and Bone Cage, each having their distinct weaknesses, as well as their Sensi having a distinct weaknesses, and by combining all 3, we are mitigating or circumventing as much of the weaknesses this build has or these skills have as possible. So for our offensive scaling, Bonestorm has a really amazing single target. And the single target resolves by just making a bunch of bone spikes and firing them at a boss. Now, the issue with this is that Bonestorm, for as good as a single target is, channeling the bone spikes and having a pause in applying your damage isn't really feeling great for mapping. So we're utilizing Bone Cage for mapping, but Bone Cage has its own issue introduced by the Ascendancy of our choice. The Blood Mage Ascendancy forces the node Sanguimancy on you, and while the upside of this node is amazing, giving you life remnants whenever you kill or critical strike an enemy, meaning that whenever you hit something, kill something, or hit something, because we are almost guaranteed to crit, we are getting some health globes or life remnants, and when we pick those up, we gain some flat life that can also overflow our life up to double it. So if we have 3k life, we can get to 6k life. This is amazing for survivability, but it has the downside of skills gain a base life cost equal to the base mana cost. This is the main downside of the Ascendancy, meaning that when we spam a skill on a high skill gem level, like we are scaling our gems levels because we gain flat damage from that, we suddenly have a very high cost, and we can't really keep this cost up in terms of mana and life. So we never really in the overflow life state, and we always need to chuck mana potions with Bone Cage alone. So this is why I'm introducing Bone Blast into the build. By using Bone Blast granted by a Bone Wand, this skill doesn't have a mana cost. This is basically the basic attack of a spellcaster. It's still considered a cast, so we can't utilize the debuff portion of Bonestorm. We only have spells here, but it allows us to spam a spell that does damage, physical damage as a matter, without needing to consume our life because it doesn't have a cost. So we can reach the overflowed life state and have the benefit of the Sanguimancy node. So now we have Bonestorm for single target, spamming Bone Blast in maps, and using Bone Cage as additional damage and survivability layer. So we now have our solid 3 skill options, but now we need to scale that damage. So we gain a lot of flat damage from scaling gem levels. we then scale crit chance and gem levels on our gear. On our passive tree, we then can further scale crit chance and crit damage multiplier. Then we scale physical damage, a little bit of spell damage, and finally we also gain access to armor break with cut to the bone. Because we're crit striking, we break armor equal to 10% of the physical damage we deal. So we just apply a lot of spell damage, or well, physical spell damage, we critical strike, and that is great. Now on single target, we can further enhance this with Soul Offering. By weapon swapping, we spawn 2 Skeletal Clerics. We can then consume those with Soul Offering, and by using any of our other skills, we swap back. In the Soul Offering, the infusion buff persists, so we are buffed and we do more damage with our Bone Blast, with our Bonestorm on big targets. It's only really the only place we need to use this. And we can further enhance our single damage by using Eye of Winter. Eye of Winter applies critical weakness on hit, so this gives us an additional 10% base crit. Now, great thing is, Bonestorm and Bone Cage and Bone Blast already have a fairly high crit chance. So when we need to crit, we already are at 15, 15 or 14%. With Eye of Winter, we had 25% base crit, so we don't need to use the node Thunder the Flash, because we are already at a base 50% crit chance, allowing us to spend another node on our Sensi passively or for a defensive layer, which we get to in a moment. So now that we have scaled a lot of crit chance and spell damage and spell level, we top it off with Score Spike to gain even more crit multi. Because we are ready to scale life as a defensive layer, Score Spike just allows us to also gain an offensive bonus from it. This gives us per 40 life crit damage bonus. Now, because it says per 40 life and because the Sensi is made around life, the way I understood it is that this is looking at our current life, not our maximum life. So when we are in an overflowed life state, we gain even more crit multi from Gore Spike, which hopefully is assuming, but if we are in a lower life total, I also read it as we actually gain less crit multi. But this would need further testing into the Sensi and into the build, where I just don't have enough time for. Now, finally taking a look at some special interactions that allow us to do even more damage. Bonestorm has 2 notable interactions. One is Scattershot. If we just channel Bonestorm, it takes some time because each channel second allows us for 1 spike. Now, if we use Scattershot, we channel slower and we do a slightly less damage, but each channel second gives us 3 spikes. So we channel those spikes up way, way quicker. And then Bonestorm has a second interesting interaction. Instead of the projector just disappearing after used, every projector that isn't hitting an enemy and explodes stays in the ground. Now, the ground is considered terrain. So if we use Ricochet, projectiles from supporter skills have a 40% chance to chain an additional time from terrain, means that whenever we hit the spikes into the ground, they can chain off the ground and hit the enemy again, allowing us to gain even more damage on it. Now, this is a neat interaction that just allows us to do more damage per spike, or rather allows us to hit an enemy with more spikes. Now, for clear, we are using Bone Blast with Spell Cascade and Fast Forward, so that the Bone Blast explode a little bit further, takes less time to apply the damage, and of course also we do them 3 at once, making them a better clear skill. And then we have Bone Cage, where we could also use Spell Cascade, but because we already use it in Bone Blast, we can instead use Spell Echo, so that whenever we do a Bone Cage, we do it twice, and we use Lockdown, that already applies then as would like 50% more damage, but then we have 220% more pin build up, meaning that we just have a very quick pin build up and it works as a really neat defensive layer. But yeah, those are the notable interactions. There's also things like last gaps on the Skeletal Cleric, so even if they will die, they will survive another moment. And then Persistence and Dense Macabre, so Soul Offering is more effective and lasts longer. But that's really all the neat interactions to have. Very quickly, while we're at the skill panel, we are reserving Blasphemy and Grim Feast and Clarity on our main setup. And in our offhand, in our weapon swap, we have the Skeletal Clerics and Blink. We have enough spirit to also activate Grim Feast, but I'm using an Oak Sworn Shield to gain 50 spirit so that I can actually reserve those additional spirits and keep Blink. Blink is a neat thing to just have in the offhand, so we can shield charge Blink if we are just looking for the last rare in a map. Alright, let's finally take a look at our defensive layout. We are scaling life. We already want life for just to have a hit pool and also using it for damage. So we have a decent life total. If I will level to level 90, I will get to 3k life. We gain a bunch of life on our gear. We then further scale our life percentage-wise from our Sensi. We gain 6% max life. And we're using 3 Grand Spectrum Ruby Jewels, giving us 2% increased max life each, resulting in another 18% percentage life. We then use energy shield bases for our defenses, so we have a lot of energy shield on our gear. We then scale that with percent energy shield on our passive tree, so that we have on top of about 3k life pool, we also have an about 3k energy shield pool. We then have a chance to overflow our life with life remnants, and we're using Grim Feast, so we have Grim Remnants, to have a chance to overflow and regain energy shield as well. So now we have energy shield overflow and life overflow, giving us a neat maximum hit pool. We then have, of course, capped resistances, we even gain +1 max res, and we even had space and spare currency left to gain some chaos resistance. Now this alone isn't quite enough. It's good enough for most cases, but for example on a boss, we don't really have the time to overflow life and DS. So for boss fights, we have access to our last 2 Ascensi nodes, Vitality Siphon and Grasping Wounds. Whenever we aren't at full life or in an overflow state, all damage we do leeches. Because we're only doing spell damage, we're only doing physical damage, we leech this damage. So we have a way to mitigate any damage, any lost life we can regain. Now further on that, on top of the leech and the life remnants, we have Grasping Wounds. 20% of life lost from hits is prevented and lost over 4 seconds. So we mitigate an additional portion of the damage and take it over time, which means that we have time to mitigate that with life remnants, with Vitality Siphon, and we also have 2% life on kill from a jewel. So with this combined, we have a lot of life recovery and life sustain. Then we have also 2% mana on kill, so we can sustain our bone blasting a little bit longer if we really need to. And we are set for that. And this is really all there is to the build, all there is to the neat interactions. We have a high max hit pool, we mitigate a little bit of damage, and we try to do a lot of damage, and we pin enemies so they don't reach us. We have a blasphemy setup so they do a little bit less damage, and we are good to go. Now hopefully this video was interesting, and let's see if the others came up with more interesting builds than I did. There will be a POV for this build in the description, so you can take a look at that, at the gem setups in a little bit more detail. I only covered the most important bits and pieces. If anything is unclear, if you have any questions left, as usual, you can ask me in the comment section, you can ask me on Discord, via designated channel or via DMs, and I will try to answer as quickly as possible. All this being said, build was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward if it gets any changes in the future that makes it maybe better, so it can compete with better skills, with the top skills. But all this being said, have a wonderful day, and I'll be seeing you in my next video. Goodbye.